Greetings and good evening to all lovely creatures of the night. Once again, the day of terror draws near and spooky stories run amok. Just for you, dear listener, I've plucked a terrifying tale from the candy jar, all in the spirit of Halloween. So grab your festive treats, pull up a chair, and if we're in luck,
Prepare for a scare.
The Mask on the Wall. A while ago, my boyfriend Gil and I went thrift shopping. We've always loved secondhand stores because you never know what you're going to find there. You can only guess what life a secondhand bathrobe or blanket lived before, so usually nobody wants them. There are, however, strange trinkets in every store, knickknacks and little oddities that really make you stop to think about who they belong to, the people who cherished them in the past, or hated them enough to give them away. Things like old pottery, sets of shiny glass angels, and even a brittle handmade dish made out of clay, with the words Grandma's Ice Cream Bowl lovingly glazed on the side. Each item has clearly had a life of its own, but by one way or another, ended up right in a convenient and cheap little store. It's almost like a ritual for us to grab a new artifact every time we visit. Each one is another weird talking point on our shelf back home. Knowing that, you can imagine my excitement when I found an ancient-looking sock mask. No, before you ask, not the socks that you wear on your feet. Sock is the comedic half of the famous Greek theater masks. You know, the one with the grotesquely big smile. Being a theater kid and a huge Greek nerd, I knew I had to have it. I called my boyfriend over to look at it, and checked it for any serious damage while I waited for him. Aside from the string being broken in the back, it was in remarkable shape. Some of the paint had rubbed off over time, but it gave almost a charming weathered look. What had to be the strangest part about it, however, was that it wasn't made of wood or plastic. It felt rough, but bent like stiff rubber. The mask itself was made out of leather. When my boyfriend walked over, I contemplated putting the mask up to my face to show it off, but decided against sticking my face into a handmade corner of dead flesh. Oh boy, Gil smiled at me. That's definitely coming home with us. And he was right. For just $3, that mask found a loving new home on our fireplace mantel. For the next few days, whenever I saw it out of the corner of my eye, I couldn't help but smile. It was such a cool find. About 4 days later, however, I woke up feeling exhausted. And when I talked to Gil after he got back from work, I learned why. According to him, in the middle of the night, I had gotten out of bed and left the room. Gil said that he assumed I needed a drink or something. I just went right back to bed, he told me. I woke up again when you came back to bed, but I didn't really look at the time. I didn't remember a thing about last night aside from getting in bed, but I did sleepwalk a lot as a kid. I would do normal stuff, like get a glass of water or grab another blanket from the closet, and then go right back to bed. I thought I'd grown out of it, but maybe not. I wrote it off as a one-time ordeal, but that's not how it went. I kept waking up exhausted, again and again. And up until the 4th day of feeling miserable, I hadn't woken Gil up once. Only that night had Gil seen me leaving the room again. But this time, he asked me what I was doing. I thought you were awake, he confessed. When I asked you what was up, you looked back at me and said, "It's important." Then you left the room. I tried to wait for you, but I passed out. At this point, I was too tired to function. I found myself bouncing in and out of sleep in the middle of the day. For the small amount of time I was awake, I was flat out grumpy and mean. I was miserable. That day, Gil and I decided to figure out what it was I was doing every night, and we installed a couple cameras in the corners of the house. He felt bad when I asked, but Gil agreed. He wouldn't try to usher me back to bed if he caught me. It was the only way to see what was going on. Besides, I couldn't ask him to stay up all night watching me, because he always had to wake up really early for his over-demanding job. The next morning, I woke up dead on my feet, but I dragged Gil over to check the cameras with me, and finally get some context on this whole mess. We fast-forwarded past 9, then 10 o'clock. We made it halfway through 11 p.m. before I finally sauntered out from the door. I waited to see myself walk to the kitchen, or into my office, trying to work on an unpowered computer. Instead, I got something far stranger. From 11:30 until 4 a.m., I stood in the living room and stared unmoving at the mask on the wall. I didn't know what to say. Of every reason to sleepwalk, was this what I've been doing every night for the past week? "You've got a therapy session today, right?" Gil chimed in. "You might want to bring this up." Luckily, he was right. I was so weary and unfocused, I had entirely forgotten. It was my childhood psychologist that helped me end this bad habit before. Maybe my current therapist could help me sort this out. I downloaded the recording on my phone and took it with me that evening. Maybe a professional could make this stop, or at least explain why it was happening. They sat quietly as I explained everything about the past week and showed them the video of my strange behavior. The room would have been dead silent, if not for the ambient hum of the video's low-pitched whine. Finally, to my relief, they lifted the weight of the air from my shoulders and gave me a reasonable answer. "Well," they led in a reassuring tone, "considering that you are between jobs, and the last few visits have been centered around depression, I might have an idea of what's happening here." They theorized that due to my recent lack of work, excitement, or activities on a day-to-day basis, my subconscious was trying to create something important for me. Something for me to do that felt necessary enough to alleviate some of the feelings of uselessness that had been building up. My panic melted away. It made so much sense, and it was so easy to fix. Pick up an activity or daily task that feels important to you, they reasoned. Something that will give you an outlet for these subconscious feelings. And if all else fails,
Throw the mask away.
the last sentence dropped my stomach like a cinder block, and I found myself surprised. Why did I care so much about this old mask I found for less than $5? If it came down to that thing or my sleep, that leather visor was free to go. I thanked my therapist over and over, then headed home to tell Gil what I learned. The next day, I was going to start sewing up all the old clothes we had that were still good. Something that saved us money and provided for our needs. A way to feel important again. The doctor had mentioned it may take a few days, but the sleepwalking should go away. I couldn't wait to get started. The next few days, I was still tired, but I pushed through and fixed what was likely over $600 worth of torn clothes. A huge chunk of money for what we made at the time. But even still, I was tired, worn down to the last strings of sanity I had left. It wasn't stopping, and I wasn't feeling better. Each night, I would stare into that mask for hours, even when Gil started hiding it. I would search for it, so calmly, like I knew I would find it eventually, but it was never actually lost. Finally, the 6th night after my therapy session, almost a whole week after, during one of my sleepwalks, I woke up in the living room. I jolted awake to the feeling of being suddenly pulled. Gil was staring at me with a concerned look on his face, his hands on my forearms, holding them down gently. "Are you actually awake?" he asked. There was a tinge of panic in his tone, and it started its own rotten seedling in mine. I told him I was. answered some personal questions to prove it, and he let my arms go with a sigh of relief. I finally looked away from the discomfort on his face and down to my hands.
I was holding the mask between my thumbs.
You were trying to put it on, Gil muttered. I know you hate real leather, so I tried to stop you, and... He paused for a moment. You started freaking out a little and pulling harder. I didn't know what to do. I started shaking you. He looked like he just hit me, so ashamed and afraid. I told him he did exactly what I would have wanted him to, and gave him a kiss to show him how much it meant to me. Then I asked him for one last thing. To take the mask and get rid of it, somewhere I will never find it. The next morning, he did exactly that. And to this day, I still don't know what he did with it. The next few nights, I was still getting up and searching for the mask. It got more and more frantic as days went by. I would wake up to a whirlwind of things thrown around the room. And after day 3, we didn't bother picking it up anymore. Eventually, I finally stopped looking, and I started sleeping soundly through the night again. That was about 2 years ago. I'm not sure exactly what was happening to me. Some people I tell about the mask assure me it must have been supernatural. But to be honest, I think the science of it being psychological scares me more. One thing is for sure, and it still bugs me to this day. I will never have closure on this. I will never know what was causing my behavior, and I will never know how close or how far away that mask really is. It's the only way. Otherwise,
I might never sleep again.
strange, isn't it? And whether it's true or false, just like this story, we will never have that closure. Because the original poster refused to post whether it was true or false. But at least for us, in this spooky Halloween season, we can choose to believe it might have been true for a little bit longer. Bear through the day of spooks and frights, then we can go ahead and pretend like it was never real at all. So stay safe, everybody. Stay close to the light.
And don't turn around.
Unless you're ready for a fright. Scare you later, folks.
Five.